Hello and welcome to the Flourishing Introvert Talks with me, Jo Rawbone. This is the podcast that celebrates the natural gifts of introverts so that we can flourish in all situations. Episode 337, The One-Way Street. We've all encountered them, so I know I don't need to explain the concept, but the way I'm thinking about it here may be a little different. For road users, a one-way street is, or should be, clearly marked, so that the direction of traffic flow is obvious, and for good reason. Failing to obey the rules of the highway can land you in serious trouble, involving a fine, points on your licence, and if you're really unlucky, a crash. I know it looks exciting in the movies when criminals race the wrong way down a street, dodging oncoming traffic, but I, for one, don't want that kind of stress in everyday life. So, thinking of life in general, whether that be the workplace, social situations, or even family life, these one-way thoroughfares tend to be not only unmarked, but we're expected to know the rules as if by osmosis. What kind of one-way street am I talking about? The thoroughfare that the extraversion bias operates on. The bias is a given, but not communicated in any way other than through behaviour and implied expectations. So we're expected to be observant enough to know the rules through deduction and assumption. And to make it more complicated, it's not us making the rules. And by us, I mean we introverts. We're the ones metaphorically fined who end up with points on our licence for crimes we didn't even know we were committing, just by being the person we are, an introvert. And our crimes? Being true to our quiet nature, keeping our heads down and remaining authentic. Some crime, huh? But let me take the analogy a bit further, because I ended up accumulating quite a few points on my business licence as opposed to my driving licence. Okay, I'm stretching the analogy a bit far now, but you'll soon see why. Resulting in points someone else was keeping a tally of and fines I didn't even know had been issued. And you know what happens to unpaid fines? A summons. That summons can take the form of a quarterly or annual review if you're lucky, or hidden agendas if you're kept out of the loop. Seem a bit melodramatic? Well, let me share with you a few of the points that I accumulated. I was a new manager and the only female in an engineering unit. In my very first management meeting, I sat waiting patiently, expecting the chairperson to give us all appropriate, if not equal, airtime. As an introvert, with my typical think, say, think communication process, I usually took a little bit more time before I had the words right in my head so that I could get them out of my mouth. But imagine my surprise, although it's probably no surprise to you, when meeting after meeting after meeting went by, dominated by the noisy few where I didn't even get a look in. Sound familiar? Then the icing on the cake was finding out that I had a reputation of taking a space at the table but adding no value. Apparently, I was the token woman. How many points do you think that amounted to? I seemed to have visibility, but little to no credibility. There's more, though. Some years later, I had developed a fearsome reputation as a problem solver, probably due to my natural talent and strengths as an introvert, coupled with my background in total quality management. When my organisation was recruiting for team members for a huge project, I expected to be a shoo-in for one of the positions. I waited and waited and waited for the invitation to arrive. Patience should be my middle name, but crickets. To say I was disappointed is the biggest understatement. But it's what happened next that really hurt. I was called on so often and mostly at short notice to sort out the really tricky problems that the team couldn't seem to solve and were now panicking about. So this time I had a credible reputation, but insufficient visibility to be memorable, it seemed. And yes, your personal brand is about credibility and memorability. But don't worry, that doesn't make it inauthentic. I could give you a few more examples, but I think you get the picture now. It was many years later that I had the big dawning, as I jokingly refer to it, the moment I realised that part of my problem was that I didn't know I was on a one-way street. Sure, I was following along dutifully, going in the direction of the herd in sheep-like fashion, so it never occurred to me that this carried risk. As it turned out, the risk was that I seemed to be the one always adapting to my environment, but there was no reciprocity. I happen to be a big fan of give and take, the two-way street, and I don't mind giving first. In fact, it's what I've done for most of my life. But there comes a time when I notice that there is little of benefit coming back in my direction. In my younger years, that triggered desertion. I would simply shut down and walk or run away. I would be quietly angry that someone thought it was okay to bleed me dry and not even offer a bandage. As I became more self-aware, I would initiate conversations about the lack of reciprocity, keen to understand and hopeful that the conversation would be enough to catalyse action. It never really was. The takers of this world believe they have the right to take and shoulder no responsibility for the impact of their behaviour. Declaring my hand here, I wish I had the tools and techniques to utilise back then that I can now offer you. And of course, in true introvert fashion, they come with reflective and reflexive learning. Which brings me to now. Having worked in and with organisations for so long, it's actually 50 years, but I feel old if I say that. I've noticed that it's not just the people who expect me to adapt, but the systems they create and maintain. It seems perfectly acceptable for people to comment about how quiet we are and label us as boring, yet the noisy ones are called fun and characterful. It's okay for meetings to be called spontaneously with no clear agenda. Talking shops like this achieve very little and yet are too often the norm. Where is the respect for prioritising, planning and processing? It's okay for promotion panels and interviews to focus on immediacy of a response and the quantity rather than the quality of contributions. It's okay for those who keep their heads down, committed to doing great work, to be overlooked for opportunities that would utilise their skills beautifully. As David, the head of communications in a previous client organisation, said, the extraversion bias seems to be the last acceptable bias. The one-way street that no one knows they are in, let alone dare to challenge. So these days, I not only initiate uncomfortable conversations about the bias, I rattle cages to shake it out. And that starts with having sufficient credibility to step into the limelight, not for reasons of showmanship, but in order to right a wrong that is being perpetuated on about 50% of any workforce. Now, I don't necessarily expect you to rattle cages, that's my choice. But I do invite you to stop blindly complying with the expected norm. You'll have many tools and techniques already, and when you start to rummage in that toolkit, the first thing I suggest you pick up are the relevant questions that you can ask of yourself and ask to some of those involved in enforcing the one-way street. Questions like, what would you change if you found yourself in a similar position to those I've just described? What would you do differently as a leader so others recognise the type of street they're on? Which streets in your life need making two-way, and what can you do to facilitate that? What support do you need to make these powerful changes? Who can you rely on as a true ally to be both advocate and partner in your endeavours? You see, it's all too easy to continually point out the problems and feel your frustration rise, but it's so much more empowering and rewarding to choose to take action, even if it starts with small steps. In fact, I'm going to recommend starting with small steps because they tend to be more doable, less risky, and ultimately sustainable. But here's the thing. No steps equals no change, and change is absolutely what's needed here. And as with any bias, it only remains whilst everyone turns a blind eye. But all it takes is for each of us to play our small part in highlighting the fact that we're being forced into a one-way street that's leading to exclusion. It's time to change the flow and the signage, so remember this. You can call on me to be your crew. Drop me an email to quietly@flourishingintroverts.com and I'll be there beside you, hard hat and all. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, then please subscribe, rate us and leave a comment, because we know that helps other people find the podcast. And if other people find us, other introverts can flourish.
You are listening to an Intentional Media Production podcast.